And uh, not long after, some couple of well-to-do guys that wanted to get into the recording business tagged me. I was already starting to look for like a storefront to put a 4-track studio in and do things, and we opened up with these guys and their financial backing. We opened what was really quite an exotic studio in '73. We were first making recordings. It was had a Neumann console. People in the recording business will recognize that is the maker of very fine microphones. Well, they also made electronics, and we had Gotham Neumann console number 8. We had the first 2-inch 16-track Studer tape machine in the country, and a bunch of fancy stuff like that. So I kind of went from being the hippie folk recording guy to suddenly having this amazing workshop, and it was way beyond my ability to draw clients, at that point. So we brought in Dave Purple as a chief engineer. Dave had worked at Chess Studios in Chicago, which was by far the hip joint, and he had done a lot of blues and R&B back then. Before that, he'd been a bass player in a band in Chicago, and he had Chess was bought out by 1968 by a big corporation, and they brought in a new manager who promptly pissed off all the hot engineers there, and all but one of them split. One of them went to another Chicago studio, another guy went to the West Coast, Ron Malo, and Dave Purple went down to Stax and went to work at Stax Studios in Memphis. And among the many things he did there, he did a lot of stuff for Ike Hayes, and he did the theme from Shaft album and won a Grammy on that. So Stax was having their own problems, and by 1972 or so, Dave was ready to move back to Chicago. So we snagged him to be our chief engineer, and he was the first guy that I really got some real practical guidance from, in terms of theories of miking and rigging a studio and dealing with things. And I still think about a lot of the stuff that I learned at that point. That's when your learning is steepest, is when you remember it most. And so anyway, that was the situation in Chicago. We did a lot of regional stuff. We did some other things. We had, because in Chicago we had all the ex-chess players, we had these hot rhythm sections we could put together, and we'd get a project where some producer from LA would fly in and he'd record maybe 24 rhythm tracks, like bass drums, basic keys, that sort of thing, rhythm guitar. And he would take then these to like Manchester, England, which at that time was where you got the best deals on fine orchestras. And out of these 24 tracks, by then he would have started kind of filtered them down, thinking, this one didn't quite happen, I don't really like this one anymore. So he'd, maybe with 16 or 18 of those songs, he would actually add orchestration to them. Then, although they were songs and in song form, we never heard them with a vocal. We were just cutting rhythm tracks. And in England, they were just playing to charts and adding their orchestration. Then they'd go back to LA and they'd start putting these with artists and finishing the overdubs out there. So, months later, I would hear something on the radio and go, man, that sounds familiar, and realize it was one of those tracks. So we were doing a lot of that kind of stuff, and we were very familiar with Muscle Shoals Sound, which had done a huge amount of tracks for Stax and other labels, Stax and Atlantic and many others, where they had an in-house band, Sharp Band. You've heard them on a million records. And so labels, just for cost and convenience, could send their producer down there with charts or songs or whatever, and get great basic tracks, then bring them back to wherever they were and add their artist and overdubs and mix it. So songs like I'll Take You There by the Staple Singers. So that has tracks that were cut in Muscle Shoals Sound, and then they were finished off and mixed in Memphis. And there was a number of Atlantic cuts that were done the same way. So anyway, we were looking on that as a business model. And when you have a big studio to keep afloat, you immediately become interested in lots of kinds of recording that you might not have thought you'd ever do. So you gotta shovel a lot of coal to keep those boats afloat. So we were trying to get rhythm track work and lots of other things and all that. But the situation at that studio got crazier and crazier. A couple of the original partners dropped out, and finally I'd had enough, and I bailed out and moved down to Atlanta. And that was the end of that chapter.